Scottish Affairs Committee today with the Secretary of State for Scotland and the Scotland Office team, who are more than welcome. And gentlemen, it's very good to see you again. Secretary of State, I understand you've got a short statement to make, and perhaps you could maybe introduce your team at the same time. Secretary of State.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm delighted to be here. I think this is my fifth appearance before this committee since becoming Secretary of State. And I will introduce, if I may, just in order, my ministers, Ian Stewart and Malcolm Offord, and then at the other end of the table, the Director of the Scotland Office, Lawrence Rockey. And I hope, as always, we can be of help to the committee. Before we do talk about the work of the Scotland Office, I thought I might put on record my disappointment that I know we both share, Mr. Chairman, in Nicola Sturgeon's recent decision not to appear before the committee. And I do think it's a great pity, because I think ministers from Holyrood and Westminster should endeavour where possible to appear before committees. And I am pleased to say no fewer than 5 UK government ministers have appeared in front of Holyrood committees in the last 12 months. Now, I don't think the First Minister's decision was a snub to you personally, Mr. Chairman, but if you had made your invitation somewhere during the Jubilee weekend, where her husband and she were having a whale of a time, you might have been able to catch her. I think there was a bit of a gap sometime between St Paul's and the concert at Buckingham Palace. That was your moment to nab her, but never mind.
Always missed opportunities. You
missed your opportunity, never mind. But look, let's not look back, let's look forward. Today is a really important day for Scotland, because it marks the start of a new phase in the rollout of free ports in the United Kingdom. Today was the deadline for bids, and I'm delighted to say that we've had 5 submissions from around the country. 5 exciting proposals to use Freeport status to build businesses and create jobs. But I must be careful with my comments, because it would be wrong of me to show favouritism towards any particular bid, as we now start the rigorous official assessment process. But if I may, I'd like to make the following general points on Freeports. They are a huge potential to boost Scotland's economy and to support our efforts to level up across the country. A couple of weeks ago, I was very fortunate to visit Teesside Freeport, and it's having a huge impact on the local community there in North England. I met that very impressive Metro Mayor Ben Houchin, who I met. He showed me around what they call the Teesworks site, and I was absolutely bowled over by what I saw, because what he has there is a 4,500 acre brownfield site, the former steelworks, the former iron ore works of land, and that brownfield site is being remediated for development, and alongside it he's built a 1,045 metre, over a kilometre long deep quay. And that construction is underway, and on the 7th of July the first business will be cutting turf. So they really are ahead of the game there, and the mood was very optimistic and upbeat, and his teams are confident in the next 5 years they will create 18,000 new jobs that are high skilled and high wage, and having met them, I have every confidence in them. I hope this time next year, the Scotland Office and your committee will be able to visit a similar site in Scotland and see a similar amount of enthusiasm and sort of can-do attitude that we saw in Teesside. So I do have a regret, and the regret is that Teesside and the other English freeports have stolen a march on us. But it's a minor gripe, because the good news is freeports are coming to Scotland. We may touch on that later, but it is a very good example of our 2 governments working together. And I say let's have more than that. And finally, Mr. Chairman, in that spirit, I'd also urge the committee to investigate the benefits for Scotland of gene editing technology. This is another area where we can work together. We can really make a difference to strengthen our food security, tackle climate change, and bring down food prices. And I want to be clear about this. Gene editing is not genetic modification. And again, if I'm questioned on that later, I'm happy to go into a little bit more detail. What it is it's using science to speed up what farmers have done for generations, breeding new strains of crops that are more disease and drought resistant. And it's also backed by bodies like the James Hutton Institute in Scotland, who are a world leader in this field. Also, Scotland's farmers and the National Farmers Union of Scotland have been very vocal in the support. They don't want to be left behind. To that end, last month, George Eustace and I wrote to the Scottish Government offering to broaden our genetic technology precision breeding bill to cover Scotland, and we still remain very hopeful that they will agree. And I would say to you, in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, if members feel that they would like a formal committee inquiry into this, we'd be very happy to contribute to that public debate and engage with you. So, Chairman, those were the points I wanted to raise from the outset. It may be that we do return to some of them in questioning. As I said earlier, I hope we can be of assistance to your committee this afternoon.
And thank you ever so much for your very concise and helpful remarks, always, Secretary of State. And I was still under the impression it was green ports in Scotland that we're looking forward to establishing.
Green free ports.
Yeah, well, there we go.
It's what we've agreed. Yeah. But we'll come on to that later if you like.
It's important we get these terms right, I think, at
the
outset of these committee sessions. And can I also thank you for your very helpful suggestion about the work of this committee. I read about it in the papers this morning, and I have to say, it greatly surprised me, and it's highly unusual, it would have to be said, Secretary of State, for a Secretary of State to suggest and recommend inquiries to the committee that's notionally responsible for the, scrutinisation of the Secretary of State's work, but we'll obviously listen very carefully to what you have to say. I mean, some people may even describe it as a disrespect to this committee to having placed it in the press first without any conversation with members on this committee, without any conversation with the chair or to the clerk's team, but we'll maybe just leave it at that. But thank you.
Well, I apologise if any offence has been caused, and I will ask within my office how that story came to end up in the papers. But there wasn't any offence that we intended to cause, I can assure you of that. And I think on my offer for gene editing, it's just such an important thing. We are on the right side of history with this. I'm sure when you look back in a few years' time, you will see that, Mr. Chairman, we just want to help as much as we can.
And it's a bill which is exclusively for England to Secretary of State, and I think I've seen the correspondence from the responsible Scottish Government Minister who says she has no intention of supporting this bill or having it adopted for Scotland.
Well, discussions are still going on between officials and ministers, and we have. The bill at the moment is respecting the devolution settlement, which is why it's England only, but we have offered it to the Scottish Government to be part of it, and our door remains firmly open in that regard.
I want to get into sort of the relationship we have between Scotland and UK governments, but just say, for example, on that very issue, if there is a refusal for your very generous offer for Scotland to be included within the auspices of the bill, if there is a refusal and a determination from Scotland to do its own particular thing, would you use the provisions of the Single Market Act to oblige Scotland to become part of it?
Well, so the United Kingdom UKIM bill, the Internal Market Bill, would protect, and along with frameworks which we've worked up in conjunction with the devolved administrations, they would protect producers and protect jobs. Well, I'm going to come to that. So if you take, for instance, if Scotland decides not to be part of the gene editing bill and farmers in Scotland can't use those seeds for their crops, it would still be the case that, for instance, the Scotch whisky industry, 20%, 25% of their malting barley will come from Northumberland or East Anglia on any given year. Even if there's a particularly good harvest, there's still a requirement for malting barley from south of the border. It's important that those businesses can still produce their whisky and still sell their whisky, or biscuit manufacturers who require wheat, similar thing, and on it goes. So it is important with mutual recognition and non-discrimination that we don't carve out and do damage to people's livelihoods.
My question was directed, would you use the provisions within the Single Market Act to ensure that English producers were able to have access to the Scottish market, even though there was an objection from the Scottish Government to have this in place?
So the objection to the Scottish Government is for farmers to use the seed to produce barley or wheat or oats or whatever produce. That's what their objection is. And as I say, we're still in discussion with the Scottish Government to try and overcome that. Farmers are backing us, the National Farmers Union of Scotland are backing us, Food and Drink, etc., etc. So all the major stakeholders are backing our position, but we want to leave the door open, keep the discussions ongoing. They haven't concluded yet. And if we don't come to an agreement, when that position becomes clear, at that point we will get legal advice as to how we proceed so we don't damage the UK internal market and do damage to businesses in Scotland that are manufacturing, because we don't want manufacturers to have to not be able to get the raw material and as a result that to damage their businesses and potentially the loss of jobs.
We also don't want governments to be disrespected.
No, and that's why we haven't included Scotland in the gene editing precision breeding bill, because we're not disrespecting.
I'm just wondering, when we look at some of the issues around the Single Market Act and some of the difficulties we're having with the Seoul Convention just now. I mean, I'm trying to think in my 21 years in this House, a time when relationships between the Scottish and UK government were so bad. Is that how you see it just now? Could you think of a point in our recent history where the relationship that seems to exist across the UK between Scottish and UK governments have been at such a low ebb?
Well, we want to work with the Scottish Government to help deliver their legislation. We saw it with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, where clauses 6 and 19 to 21 were out of scope, but I wrote to John Swinney in some detail to explain how that could be rectified. And we want to work with the Scottish Government so they can deliver their legislation within scope. Inevitably, there have been bills that have gone through without a legislative consent motion, but we knew that would be the case because Mike Russell made it very clear to us right at the start of the Brexit process that Brexit-related bills would not get an LCM. And we understand that, but for the good of the UK economy and to protect Scottish jobs, we've had to proceed on that basis and bring certain bills through. We understand that there's a disagreement. You know, I get up every day and want to strengthen the United Kingdom. Nicola Sturgeon gets up every day and wants to destroy it. I understand that. That's, you know, we can, but we have to deliver as two governments. We have to deliver for the good of people. Scotland has two governments, and our job is to make sure that we work with the Scottish Government as best we can. And I implore them to work with us so that we can deliver for the people of Scotland on their priorities.
Just wondering if that type of language actually helps the situation.
Well, no, I'm just trying to put it in a nutshell.
Let me put it to you, like when you talk about Nicola Sturgeon wanting to break up the UK, but you want to strengthen it. You think these sort of remarks actually help build?
Well, it doesn't matter. I've said it. Well, I've said it at the dispatch box, so it's in Hansard. So I'm not going to row back from it now.
Chairman, I wonder if I could give you a couple of examples where we do have very constructive working relationships. The first is in the vitally important area of welfare. I work very closely with my counterpart, Shona Robertson and Ben McPherson, on looking at the whole programme of the sort of shared competence the two governments have. We are dealing with some of the most vulnerable people in society, so it's absolutely essential we get those arrangements right. And I'm happy to say we are making very good progress on delivering the transfer of welfare powers and delivery that was agreed at the 2016 Scotland Act. And we've gone out of our way, for example, on the adult disability payment to speed up the processes here so that the Scottish Government can meet its timescale. The second example I would give was just last week. I had two meetings at very short notice with Ivan McKee to deal with a particular issue with one of the city and regional growth deals. So on a day-to-day basis, we have very productive and constructive relationships.
And thank you for that. I'm absolutely certain. I've seen some of that work myself, and I congratulate ministers who do work consensually and across government to deliver that type of package. But there's one particular area where there is no agreement, and just like your view on it given, it is so currently. Last week, the First Minister announced their intention to hold a second independence referendum in October next year, and it looks like the Scottish Parliament is likely to bring legislation to the Scottish Parliament to have that approved. We've already heard that the UK government is of a mind to rule this out and not to sanction or grant any Section 30 order. What is there for the democratic route for Scotland to secure independence if there isn't a route with agreement with the UK? What does Scotland have to do to secure its independence and to dissolve the union between the two nations of the United Kingdom?
Well, our firm belief is that now is not the time. And we've been very clear about that. We think this is not high in the list of priorities for people in Scotland. We believe they want to, as I said earlier, to see the two governments working together constructively, tackling the cost of living challenge, looking at long-term energy security, the response on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, leading on that, growing our economy so people have better livelihoods, having saved their lives with the vaccine. That's what we believe that people of Scotland see as their priorities, alongside the things that keep them awake at night, if you like, when they get, which are, if their children at school, it's failing school standards, if it's COVID backlog, if they need to, an NHS appointment, drug deaths in some communities, or even the F word. If you live in the Highlands Islands, you'd like a ferry. Those are the things I think that people can care about and think are the priorities that the Scottish Government should be focusing on. And I know those first items are listed, working with the UK Government on.
And I know everyone's got a view of a referendum, but my question was about what does Scotland have to do, if it's not through the Scottish Parliament to try and secure the independence referendum, what is the democratic route for Scotland securing its independence?
Well, as I say, when I look at the desire for an independence referendum in these opinion polls, the numbers are relatively low, not just for next year, but over the next 3 years. And I don't acknowledge, and I've said this again before, I don't acknowledge that last year, having not secured a majority, having got a third of the electorate to vote for the SNP, only a third of the electorate voted for the SNP at Holyrood last year, I don't see that as a mandate for an independence referendum. I make that quite clear. I think people want us to focus on the priorities.
Well, more MSPs than ever in the Scottish Parliament were voted who support an independence referendum. That's just simply the case. Now, it does look like the Scottish Parliament will legislate. I mean, the UK government is obviously very much opposed to this. What would you do to stop this taking place?
Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. That is entirely a matter for the law officers, as I've said in the past. Our position as a UK government is we want to carry on delivering on the priorities, levelling up, saving livelihoods, the things that the people of Scotland care about. That's where our priority lies. Any constitutional wrangling or uncertainty we don't think is good for the Scottish economy, and we don't think it's where people's priorities lie at the moment. You know, and you refer to this majority within the Scottish Parliament, and I point you back to the interview the First Minister gave in the Herald during the Holyrood election last year, where she thought people were going to vote early on for Alex Salmond's Alba party, and he was asking for the second vote. SNP won and give you a list vote to Alba, and she said that's gaming the system, is how she rephrased it in the paper. And I agree with her. I mean, I think it's gaming the system, but equally, it's gaming the system if you think the Greens achieved the same thing. You know, she relies heavily on her coalition partners, the Greens, for this, and yet they are very similar travellers to the Alba Party in that regard.
I'm just trying to find what the UK government intends to do, given that this is likely to be even before the Scottish Parliament in the next few months. I mean, could you give us no suggestion or hint?
We intend to get on with the day job and focusing on the people's priorities.
Right, well, lastly from me, has the Prime Minister got the full support of the UK party of government in Scotland? Has he got the full support of that party, your party?
Yes, he's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. We all work together to deliver on the priorities. He's a staunch supporter of the Union. He is all parts of the United Kingdom. He is a staunch supporter and an advocate for them. He's right behind the levelling up agenda. He was, when I wanted to take, if you like, structural funding and deliver it directly to local authorities, practicing real devolution, the first person to back me on that project was the Prime Minister. And we can all see the benefits from that. The UK government is showing its relevance in Scotland, two governments, as I say, working together in Scotland, and the Prime Minister is right behind that agenda. He really appreciates hugely appreciates all the benefits that all parts of the United Kingdom bring to the pot. He's a unionist to his core.
The Prime Minister has the full support of all MPs and MSPs of the party of government in Scotland.
Well, no. I would ask that question of the First Minister or Ian Blackford. I mean, we know that no one has the full support of everyone in this trade that you and I are in. We know that isn't the case.
Okay, right. Thank you for that. Sally Ann Hart.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon to the panel. I'm going to look a bit at the Shared Prosperity Fund. So the UK government has made it clear that huge investment in Scotland is a key part of its economic plans for the next decade. What are the UK government's main ambitions for the Shared Prosperity Fund in Scotland?
Thank you. If I can take the lead on that. First of all, I'd say that the Shared Prosperity Fund is just one strand of a wider ambition taken together with the city and regional growth deals, the Levelling Up Fund, Community Ownership Fund, and so on. And that is to empower local areas to identify the longer-term investments that they want to see in their local areas. Sometimes that will be an individual local authority, sometimes it will be a cluster of authorities working together. So the Shared Prosperity Fund is just one strand of that. And we think that by empowering those local areas, we work from the bottom up. I don't sit with a spreadsheet saying I want X% of the investment to be in regeneration and Y% to be in transport and so on and so forth. It's the quality of the bids that come up from the local area, the quality of the projects. So that's the overall ambition for the Shared Prosperity Fund as part of the wider levelling up agenda.
So, looking at the bids, obviously you'll be measuring success. So what does success look like for levelling up in Scotland? And how will you measure the outcomes? I know when they're making the bids, these local areas, they need to set out what their aims are, what they want their outcomes. How will you measure those outcomes?
Well, say in terms of each individual project, of course there has to be the appropriate business case and the due diligence that any public spending has to go through. But as I say, the success is not for me to sort of say, well, we've ticked 18 boxes. That's not what it's about. It's not about central government dictating, whether that's Edinburgh or Westminster, to what each area wants. The success for me is the development of those local partnerships between governments of all spheres, with community organisations, the academic sector, the third sector, the private sector. And that's what we're seeing. The city and regional growth deals have been at different stages in different parts of Scotland, but they've been around for a number of years now. And that's what we're seeing, that good local partnership working is there. And the thinking and the development that's going into the other funds, I think, is strengthening that. So that's for me what is success, that there is that rich network in each local area, identifying what they wish to see and us giving them the means to deliver it.
The Public Accounts Committee said quite recently that despite billions spent on local growth policies over many years, the government does not have a strong understanding of what works. Would you agree with that assertion?
I don't, because I think it goes back to that basic principle that we as central government are wanting to achieve a specific outcome in terms of a regeneration project or transport connectivity, whatever it is. That's not what it's about. I'd turn that point on its head. And it's what works in local areas. Are those local areas happy with what investment is going on? And I think we're already starting to see some of the tangible benefits of the early investment. So if you take Glasgow, for example, where the growth deal enabled the regeneration of the Clyde at Tradeston. That work then enabled Barclays to come in and build their new headquarters with, I forget the number, I think it's in the region of 2,000 jobs. So that's a demonstration of success when these projects start to come to fruition. But by their very nature, they are long-term in their development.
So just looking at that a little bit closer, so the use of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund in Scotland will be used more locally, and it will be local organisations, local authorities, local partnerships that will look at the evidence base and a strategic focus.
That's correct. And the other, just to be clear, the difference between the Shared Prosperity Fund and the Levelling Up Fund bids, the Levelling Up Fund is a competitive one, whereas the Shared Prosperity Fund is an allocation to each of Scotland's 32 local authorities. But the local authorities can then decide if two or more want to partner to use some or all of that funding for a specific project. They've got that flexibility. But that's the thinking behind it is it's those locally driven agendas and priorities that are the key.
Localism working at its best.
Yes.
If I may, and just to respond to kind of your previous question, is at the heart of the Levelling Up white paper, which I guess is the sort of sets the broader scene for these funds, was 12 missions, and missions that will successfully measured over a 10-year period and in legislation reported on annually. So I think there is a desire from the government to both report on progress, but I think the important point is that kind of economic growth in a place takes quite a long time, and therefore perhaps one of the lessons from the past is, too much chopping and changing rather than a long-term approach. And I think that sort of 10-year time frame is an important piece of context.
Thank you for that clarity. Looking at the Ministerial Forum, what will be the role of the UK-wide Ministerial Forum for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and how will it support the delivery of the fund? Is that you, Minister Stewart?
Yes, it's what we want to see is all the devolved administrations involved in this, because, as I say, a lot of the time the money spent through the Shared Prosperity Fund and the other levelling up ones will be to complement other spending streams and to enable other investments to come in. So we think that this forum will be a useful body in which to facilitate those discussions.
And has the Scottish Government accepted your invitation to be part of that Ministerial Forum?
Well, we've made the invitation, as you say, and we're awaiting a definitive response.
Why do you think they haven't responded?
I'm afraid you'll need to ask the Scottish Government that.
Thank you. In terms of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund investment priorities, which are to do with local people, you say local communities and local businesses, as the funding is going directly to those local communities, what steps are you taking to work directly with local communities on their priorities?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's a dialogue I'm having with local authorities across Scotland. A couple of weeks ago, for example, I was up in Inverness meeting with representatives from Highland Council, University of Highlands and the Islands, and a whole range of other local stakeholders. And one of my questions to them was, how are you reaching out to the different communities within your county, and Highland particularly because it's such a large geographic area? And I was very pleased that the sort of community engagement forums and the other mechanisms that they've got in place are there to, the ideas and the requests will come up. I don't think there's going to be a shortage of interest in requesting funds.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that at all, or no?
I think the lens to look at this is that over the last 30 years has been an unequal spread of prosperity across the UK, and we would say that talent is equal everywhere, but opportunity maybe not. And the place to start is actually a lot to do with local communities, civic pride, getting a feeling of localism, getting things spruced up. Frankly, levelling up's a big agenda. I mean, levelling up is covering a whole raft of things, some of which are devolved, some of which are reserved. The main issue, I would say, if you want to do levelling up, the first thing you do is sort the education system out, but that's a devolved matter, so let's not go there. But the UK government has got an interest in saying that the UK as a whole needs to begin to look more equal, and it doesn't look that equal, and therefore let's target areas that have been deprived of that, and let's start at least with localism, and let's start with local people deciding what's best for them, and let the local people judge whether they think it was a good investment.
And if I can just add to that, I think there's a growing awareness that not one body or part of government has all the answers. And that's why this partnership working is incredibly important. And that's what, it started, maybe not started, but it was first evident with the city and regional growth deal working. And that's worked at different paces and different ways in different parts of Scotland, as you would expect. But what we're seeing now is that sort of enrichment of it and a willingness for different areas to work together to realise their ambitions.
And the city and regional growth deals in Scotland have been successful. You've been able to measure the success of those.
Well, it's yes. For some of the older ones,
Yeah.
I think Glasgow was the first back in 2014, and there's been a pipeline of them. You know, there's still some. There's a deal in place for every authority. Some have still to get to, the full business case sign off. But there's around Scotland, plenty of examples of where it's working very well, and I think I can see at least 4 of the members around the table have got very good projects in their area, which I've been able to visit. I was at the Eden campus in North East Fife, James Hutton Institute in Perth and North Perthshire, and I was at the launch of in Murray the Digital Health Initiative, which I think has got the potential to be a global game changer in how we deliver healthcare. So yes, there are already tangible benefits visible, but as has been pointed out, a lot of the investments are long-term in their nature, so there won't be bricks and mortar and tangible outcomes everywhere at once.
No.
I was just going to add that, kind of from a technical perspective, each area or region produces and agrees with both governments a kind of annual performance report, and obviously that goes through their local governance, and we then have a annual conversation, both the Scottish Government and UK Government, with the region on progress to date over the year. So that hopefully striking the right balance between ultimately local accountability, which is at the heart of the agenda, whilst also making sure we're having an active conversation. And the only final thing I would say is that when you're out with local partners, both the business community and the local authorities, is that I guess City and Growth deals and UK SPF and Levelling Up Fund feels like a continuum rather than a separate piece, and there's a huge amount of enthusiasm for I guess the fundings available to deliver the projects that they have identified, and I guess a sense that they have quite clear strategies for what success looks like in their own areas, and what they need is government supporting them rather than government telling them what to do. And I think that principles at the City and Growth deals and plays through to UK SPF.
Thank you for that. So just looking at the Secretary of State for Michael Gove, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Michael Gove, has said that there'll be no gap in funding with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund compared with EU levels received. How much EU legacy funding remains to be invested in Scotland for the period of 2022 to 2025? Who can answer that question?
Well, we're in this sort of transition period at the moment, whereby the tail of the EU structural funds is gradually winding down, and that will last over the next 2 to 3 years. At the same time, the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is there to replace the 2 EU structural funds, will ramp up. So yes, there will be no gap between in the total amount that comes, but the mix of it will change over the years.
The Scottish Government has claimed that there'll be a 337 million shortfall in funding over that 3-year period, and the Scottish Government uses a different approach to the UK Government to calculate the amount required to supplant EU funds. Can you explain the different approaches?
I don't agree with the Scottish Government's figures for a number of reasons. Firstly, they are including in their sum money that is not included in the EU structural funds. Those are principally in the agriculture spending. So the UK, that money is still being spent, but by a different route. So it's wrong to include it in what would come through the structural funds. The 2 structural funds are the ERDF, the European Regional Development Fund, and the European Social Fund. That's what Shared Prosperity Fund is replacing. Other schemes are dealt with in a different way. There are also, we're not sure that they're using the correct exchange rate figure to translate from euros into sterling. We don't think they're using the correct inflation rate to make the appropriate adjustments, and there's a number of other technical reasons why we don't agree with the Scottish Government's figure. But I'm satisfied that we are meeting our commitment to replace the two structural funds with Shared Prosperity Fund.
And I would add just to that the Treasury are satisfied as well, because we've obviously kept a beady eye on it in our discussions with them.
Well, thank you for that clarification. That's very helpful. Just looking at the Multiply programme, what work has the UK Government undertaken to ensure that the Multiply programme complements learning provision in Scotland rather than duplicating existing provision, if any? I know that the Scottish Government published an adult learning strategy, I think, in May. Does it contain anything that might duplicate the Multiply programme?
Well, again, we've been deliberately non-prescriptive in how each local area uses their Multiply, and we absolutely want it to be complementary to other schemes that are or are planned to be in existence. So if I can give you one hypothetical example where it could operate. Many councils and charities will offer families debt counselling and management support. If as part of that they can identify a need for greater adult numeracy to complement the service that's offered, that would be a good use of the Multiply scheme. But again, it's not for us to be prescriptive and say this is what you do with the money. It's for the local areas to determine what works best in their area to complement what else might be available, whether that's from the authority themselves, from Scottish Government, from the third sector. It's designed to add to, pardon the pun, add to numeracy skills, not duplicate.
Okay, thank you. Any further comment from anyone before I finish? Thank you. No further questions, Chair.
Thank you. John Lamont.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon to the panel. I want to ask around three different areas. The first one is just a brief reflection to the Secretary of State. The first 18 minutes of this committee session were taken up by questions from the SNP chair around constitutional grievance, referendum, and continual sort of disruption that the SNP tried to cause for Scotland, as opposed to an investment that the UK government is making into Scotland, levelling up the cost of living crisis. What does that say about the SNP's priorities?
Well, it's always the same old drum. I mean, Sturgeon's document last week was called a scene setter. I mean, from as far as I was concerned, and reading the media in Scotland last week, it was I've seen it all before. And it's simple as that. We've been, this comes round time and time again. It's not where we are. We know what the priorities of the Scottish people are. We know their concerns. We want to work with the Scottish Government to address those concerns, and we want the Scottish Government on the devolved areas to focus, and it's entirely a matter for them where they focus their energies, but we would like them to focus their energies on the things that matter to people, whether it's educational standards, NHS backlog, drug deaths, etc., etc. We want, that's where I think, as someone who pays my taxes in Scotland, that's where I would like to see them focusing their energies. As a grandparent, etc., etc. I would like to see the focus going into the things that the public services and what devolution was meant to be about. That's what devolution was for. It was when in 1998, when the Scotland Act was written, it was written to devolve more locally powers to people, and to that end, that's what I'd like the Scottish Government to focus on, because it's to all our advantages if that works.
Okay, thank you. I agree, by the way. In your opening remarks, you made reference to gene editing technology, yes. And you rightly stated that Scotland is a world leader in this area, with the Hutton and Roslin Institutes being at the forefront of this research, and you also referenced that the National Farmers Union of Scotland is very supportive of this work. But what can you do to ensure that Scotland enjoys the benefit of this technology in the same way that England does?
Well, we'll continue at ministerial and official level to talk to the Scottish Government. I mean, we have months ahead of us where the door can remain open as the bill progresses. We're very keen that the Scottish Government takes the opportunity to engage in this, because we are consulting, the EU are consulting on it. Scotland is going to potentially be left behind, because this is not genetic modification. This technology is coming. It's what farmers have done for centuries, but what would have taken 10 years can now take weeks or months. But it's still gene editing. It's not genetic modification. I should be clear about that. And so our view, there has been some misunderstanding. The reason I make that point is some, particularly one Scottish Government minister, has confused that and the difference between GM and GE. This is GE. This is not adding genes in. This is proceeding with editing genes, as I say, as farmers have done with crossbreeding for centuries. And I think we're on the right side of history, because it will help against climate change, and it will help against disease. It will reduce fertilizer requirements for farmers, so it will reduce, therefore, costs, which in turn will bring down the cost of food to people in the shops. I mean, on every measure, we're on the right side of the balance sheet on this. And that is something that every stakeholder organisation we've engaged with has told us. Food and Drink, National Farmers Union of Scotland, the scientific institutes you mentioned, and the farming community. I've had a lot of farmers, particularly in your constituency, getting in touch with me and saying this is something we absolutely need, and actually making the point that many years ago, I think the example they used was Golden Promise, the barley Golden Promise, which was gene edited in the 1960s and was transformational for the industry by reducing the stalk and making it stronger, so the straw stood up and it had higher yields. This technology has been around for a long time. It's right that we get back in front of it now.
Yeah, good. You very well described the difference between gene-edited and gene-modified crops, but in terms of the UK government's precision breeding bill, can you just explain why or the reason why they're regulated in a slightly different way?
Well, it's funny enough. I'm told by DEFRA that there was a misjudgment in the EU in a ruling where the judge confused GM and GE, which the EU have acknowledged are now looking at. So they're consulting this themselves and intend to rectify that. I think 7 or 8 EU member states have already said that they would like that, have already come forward in the last month and said they would like that to be rectified. But genetic modification is where you take genes that are not related in any way to something and bring them in. That is not what this is about, and that's not something we agree with, to be quite clear. Genetic editing is, as I say, as you breed out and genes, edit the plant or the animal. I mean, it happens all the time in the animal world, but it's a bit more instantaneous, if I can put it that way, than it is. It takes a lot longer with crops, and this will speed things up, and it's at a time when we need to speed things up.
Just to build on that the process for getting authorization for a genetically modified crop requires an awful lot of trials and testing, which effectively means it's not commercially viable to do so. And at the moment, that similar process applies to a gene-edited product. So whilst the technology is there, the costs and the barriers to market are sufficient that makes it not possible. So the design of the bill is to remove those barriers and make the registration process akin to other sort of naturally developed crops, and thereby making the market much more viable.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And my last question, I think, will be to Minister Stewart. It's about the Borders Railway. Surprise, surprise. I very much welcome the funding in the Borderlands growth deal for the feasibility study. But as you will know, there's growing frustration that the feasibility study hasn't yet got off the ground. I just wondered if you could update us.
Well, to the extent that discussions with DFT are ongoing, and I hope to get an answer very soon. But the money that is part of the growth deal is there. Like any bid for growth deal money, it has to go through the usual due diligence tests, but I'm very hopeful we will get there very soon. But discussions are ongoing, and I wrote to the leaders of the local authorities last week just to say it's still a live discussion. It hasn't been forgotten about.
But the UK government remains committed to the feasibility study.
That £5 million is part of the deal, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, panel, for your time this afternoon. Can I just ask, first of all, Secretary of State, what is your analysis and the Scotland Office's analysis of the main implications for Scotland of the changes being proposed to the Northern Ireland Protocol by the UK Government?
Well, we think that the changes we're making, and I think they're relatively tweaky rather than wholesale changes, and we're not tearing up the protocol. What we're proposing in this bill is to make what I think are eminently sensible changes to east-west trade. So we're not changing north-south trade in between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. It's about Scotland and GB into Northern Ireland, those east-west changes. And what we're proposing is a red channel and a green channel. I think you'll have read about this, but the green channel is for goods going, let's say, from Cairnryan to Larne or Belfast, and they go straight through. Goods going to the Republic of Ireland would go through the red channel, and they would be subjected to checks, and potentially those would be helped or ameliorated by a trusted trader scheme, which is another concept that's well known to the European Union. So we're not doing anything that isn't, I think, perfectly sensible and good for traders, good for businesses, and good for consumers.
So you see a benefit to Scotland from the changes that are
being proposed? Yeah, I do. I see an
an
enormous benefit from the changes. I think it will allow the smaller traders who have found costs prohibitive with the current system. They'll be able to use the green channel. Those costs will disappear, and it will increase trade.
So can I go on then to ask you, Secretary of State, that one of the challenges potentially of what you've outlined there is potential retaliatory action by the European Union, which they have stated they will go ahead with as a result of last week's first bill reading. What do you think will be the impact of those retaliatory measures?
Well, they've suggested there'll be infractions and legal proceedings. I mean, first of all, the bill hasn't come forward, so there is no impact at the moment on traders because nothing is going to happen. So I'd say to everyone, don't change stand firm, don't change what you're doing, because there is no immediate impact. But we will keep in constant dialogue with both the Scottish Government and with traders and businesses on this, because obviously north of England there may be trade going through Cairnryan, for instance. So it's a pan-UK communications challenge, if you like. But I still think there is no reason for the EU to start a trade war with us over this, because I think that when they look at our proposals of the red and green channel, they will see that they're perfectly sensible. And we're still saying with the red channel you can do the checks that you want to do. That's not changing in any shape or form. But why we know that it's not working at the moment is that 20% of the checks that the EU do, so if you think of the whole border of the European Union, 20% of the checks, 1 in 5 of the checks are GB Northern Ireland at the moment. I mean, it's a crazy, crazy number. Thousands and thousands of checks going on, and yet not a single one has found a problem. So that's why I think the trusted trader scheme can work for the red channel, and the green channel obviously works because it's into UK trade.
You would expect my counter to that be the fact that these are eminently sensible proposals. Why haven't they been discussed in the negotiations that the EU and the UK government have already been having in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol? Why has the government felt the need to bring through these changes by disapplying parts of the protocol as they are suggesting?
Well, I think that's a very good question. It's a very good challenge. When I was sitting in cabinet and the proposal was brought forward, I asked myself the very same question: Why didn't we do this back in the day when it was a previous negotiating team, but when they were negotiating that detail before the meeting with Leo Varadkar that took place, that signed off? why weren't these options? They just strike me as very sensible.
Why haven't they been discussed more recently, given the
so there have been
place?
so there have been discussions ongoing between the UK and the EU for months. I mean, Michael Gove was engaged in them, and then Liz Truss was engaged in them. So those discussions have been ongoing, and as to the detail of those discussions, you'd have to ask them. But this strikes me as a very sensible solution. Those who travel through airports will have seen red and green channels. It's not complicated. I think it's a pity we didn't go down this route at the beginning, but I think it's the right route to go down now.
Okay, thank you. So the First Minister of Wales, as well as the First Minister of Scotland, said that they were not happy with what the UK government was proposing. And indeed, Mark Drakeford called for an interministerial UK-EU relations meeting to discuss the protocol. Has that been discussed at an IMG? Is such a meeting going to happen?
So there is an interministerial group for UK-EU relations, and from memory, it has met once on the 17th of February this year. 17th of February, is that right?
I haven't got the precise date, but there is a meeting of that committee this month, I understand.
There is a meeting, well, I was coming on to that, but it has only met once so far. It was on the, I'm going to now look at my note and tell you that it was on the 17th of February. But I can move things along a bit in the direction that you might be going, to say that prior to the bill being introduced in the House, the Foreign Secretary was in contact, as was another UK government minister, with ministers in Scotland. The bill was shown prior to it being announced, and explanations, but there were explanatory notes attached to it prior to the first reading. So there has been communication between UK government ministers and Scottish government ministers on this very subject, even if the ministerial group hasn't met.
Okay, so the IMG for UK-EU is due to meet this month, but it's not. Would you still look to invite the devolved administrations to those meetings, or is that not something that they're normally?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we would. Yes.
Great.
Definitely.
Okay, so if I can move on then, one of the other challenges, and we've heard this in this committee, particularly immediately post our departure from the EU, was the real issues that Scottish food producers were having in terms of getting their products to the EU. And the National Farmers Union of Scotland has said that the decision of the UK government to continue to delay EU import checks are handing a competitive advantage to other food producing nations over Scottish producers. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, the government doesn't agree with that. I mean, the Scottish Farmers Union, National Farmers Union of Scotland know that. We don't agree with that. There have been a range of challenges to the supply chain. We've had disruption as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the wider cost of living issues. We are very aware of that, and it was our decision not to put import controls on goods coming in, because we decided that that would potentially be an unnecessary burden on traders, but also add cost to consumers. And so we thought it was pragmatic not to introduce those controls, as it is something we can make, we can take the lead on, because we thought it was better to protect British consumers.
At a very basic level, there are rules for people, for goods coming into the EU, but there is still nothing in place for UK producers or EU producers coming in. So the challenge, I suppose, my challenge is that
there is
how is it for Scottish producers that they are not impacted by the fact that there are no restrictions on produce coming into the EU?
Well, there are restrictions. So on the certain sort of what we call high-risk items, on the 1st of January 2021, we brought in the phyto and sanitary and phytosanitary restrictions on animals, animal byproducts, plants, plant products, etc., from the EU. So those import controls are in place. But regarding all the other items you refer to, we decided, to the benefit of the consumer, not to put import controls in place, because, as I say, because of potential supply chain issues with the difficulties, particularly the difficulties we're seeing in Ukraine.
Okay, and I suppose my point would be on Ukraine that we are looking at food security, and there is the risk that this decision impacts on food security from a Scottish perspective, that we can't produce, we will put producers potentially out of the market.
This brings you back to gene editing. Why on earth would the Scottish Government not want to do this? When we need food security, we need to improve yields, we need to get costs down, we need to be able to put more food at affordable prices in front of our population. Gene editing is a good example of that. All of the institutes want to do it, the farmers want to do it.
And NFUS are supportive of it as
well. So it's back to the same point.
So you were going to ask me a question?
So my final question, Minister Stewart mentioned his visit to St Andrews to the Eden campus, which was part of the Tay Cities deal, largest employer in my constituency, and it has had impacts from our departure from the EU, both through the loss of Erasmus, but also from a UK government decision to cut the age budget means it has been impacted by research funding. So I'm obviously concerned about Horizon programme being brought into the ongoing discussions around the Northern Ireland Protocol. So can I ask what role the Scotland office is having in relation to either maintaining Horizon or secondly what ambitious alternative programmes there might be, as the Foreign Secretary has suggested?
This is his specialist subject.
I wouldn't go that far. But no, seriously, it's, I meet with Minister George Freeman on a very regular basis. Our membership of Horizon, Copernicus and Euratom were part of the TCA. And we absolutely want to be part of them. The blockage is not at our end. And I know Minister George Freeman is continuing discussions to make sure we do. However, I'm also reassured that should that be impossible, then the quantum of research funding will be maintained.
Sorry.
So I was just going to say, if I can look back to some of the levelling up discussions, part of the levelling up white paper was to have an even greater share of R&D spending outside the golden triangle of London, Oxford, Cambridge. And I'm very certain that St Andrews and other Scottish universities will profit from that, as they are through the... appreciate this isn't specifically St Andrews, but the Glasgow being part of the Innovation Accelerator, along with West Midlands and Greater Manchester. So our commitment to R&D is absolute.
Just finally, on Erasmus, the Scottish Government had proposed a replacement Erasmus scheme, and we indeed had you here when you came to give evidence to the Affairs Committee on that. They've not moved forward with that, but the Welsh Government have moved forward with their TAITH programme, probably pronouncing that completely incorrectly. Can I ask, is there anything from a UK Government perspective that would prevent the Scottish Government from doing something similar?
Well, on the Turing scheme, which has replaced Erasmus, I visited St Andrews and both discussed it with Dame Sally Mapstone and met some of the students who'd taken advantage of it, visiting projects in Africa, which wouldn't have been possible under the Erasmus scheme. So, Turing is in its infancy. It will continue to evolve.
Interesting to see how it ends up with Capita now in charge.
Forgive me, that's not my... I don't have details on that. But, I think this will continue to evolve and deliver what we want it to be, and that is a fairer, wider-reaching programme. I don't want to diminish the importance of Erasmus.
Can I confirm nothing to stop the Scottish Government progressing with a scheme similar to the Welsh Government, in addition to Turing? Well,
I would need to check what the Welsh Government actually has proposed. It wasn't possible for a devolved administration to remain part of the Erasmus scheme itself, because it's a UK-wide scheme. I will need to check what the Welsh Government one entails and whether that's... But please do. I'm happy to have a further discussion.
We will come back to you on that.
Lovely. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Gigi Brock.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to our witnesses today. Just returning to the gene editing issue, because it is very live at the moment, of course. The Bill Committee starts sitting next week, and we'll start to take evidence from a variety of experts on this. But I note you mentioned that the EU is reviewing its position on gene editing of plants and animals. And I just wanted to run a quote past you from the German Environment and Consumer Protection Minister, who said, "Any new set of rules EU puts out must continue to include mandatory labelling and be underpinned by the EU's precautionary principles." She also pointed out that once, and I think this is a really important point to make, once a new genomic technique is released to the environment, it is almost impossible to remove it. Potential risks not only to the plants but also to ecosystems and biodiversity must be identified and evaluated precisely. So doesn't that suggest that a cautious approach to this is absolutely valid?
Yeah, and that's what the director was referring to, I think, earlier when he mentioned that you have to go through, you've still got to go through the trials and get the approval.
Mm-hmm. But as she says, once new genomic techniques are released, it's almost impossible to remove that from the environment. Doesn't that
which is why you go through the trials? But is why you go through the trials. But the thing I would say to that, because this is entirely what I've been told by the scientists, is this direction of travel is a direction of travel that would be got to naturally. It's not. There's nothing unnatural about gene editing. Genetic modification is unnatural, but genetic editing is taking you in a direction that, in terms of animals, you can get there very quickly, and we have many of our animals. And if you look at cattle, slur, the different crosses, ling, etc. It's all genetic editing. It's all crossing out. I suppose if I take it to the dog world, a Labradoodle is genetic editing. But if you want to take it to seeds, it takes a little bit longer to get there. It might take 10 years, but with the James Hutton Institute might achieve that in weeks or months. And that's the point when we're looking to take advantage of the situation we find ourselves in, and then the correct approvals have to go into place. But we're not doing anything that you wouldn't naturally get there anyway if you were to go down a process of crossbreeding.
I mean, there are scientists who would disagree with that position, of course. But
Tell me who. Name three.
That we'll be looking at that, I'm sure, next week.
I'm sure, yeah.
But as you as mentioned, the EU is reviewing this. I'm just wondering, given that research surely will greatly assist with the decision-making of the UK government on this issue, why the rush? Why not wait until that research is complete, which I understand is fairly imminent, I believe, by mid-next 2023.
What research is complete?
The research that the EU is conducting.
We're not members of the EU. You need to move with the times. That's behind us now. We have.
No,
but I must make this point. We have the world-leading institute in Scotland, in Dundee, the James Hutton Institute. They are the world leaders on this. I mean, let's not look to the EU to hold our hands. We can do something really forward-thinking here and get a grip. Honestly, I think that remark just doesn't sit comfortably with me. We don't have to. It's like free ports. We can do these things now, and help our economy. We can help our farmers. We can help consumers with the price of food in the shops. We have this opportunity in front of us now. Let's be grown up about it, for goodness sake.
Can I just tell you that according to a recent poll conducted by the Daily Mail, actually, a bit of you're very familiar with the Daily Mail, of course, as a Tory party member. Of 2,000 people, just in England, Northern Ireland and Wales, 84% said it was very or fairly important that gene-edited food was labelled as such, but this bill doesn't cover that. What do you say to those people who are clearly concerned about the fact that they will be eating food that they may not wish to?
Well, Golden Promise, the barley that revolutionised in the late 60s, early 70s, was gene-edited. It was a natural progression. It didn't need to be labelled. It's not bringing it. Scientists will explain it's not something that's doing anyone any harm. Well, there are gene-edited tomatoes being sold which are very high in vitamin D, which is a very good thing for people, particularly those of us who live further north. Okay. That, again, is not, as long as they go through the proper tests and trials and are approved by the scientists, and then it makes perfect sense. It is not genetic modification, and we shouldn't confuse it with such, where you're taking genes that are not naturally part of that species and bringing them in. That is not something that we're advocating here. What we're advocating here is speeding up nature.
Can I just say, though, that by not using labelling, that makes it more difficult for us, for our exporters and our food producers, to sell into Europe, as I understand it, because
Europe
GMO products,
actually,
that
question.
Can I just finish?
Can I stop you there, actually, because that isn't true.
Not really.
We have checked. DEFRA have checked with the EU, and the EU receives gene-edited produce.
It's much more stringently regulated, though. And if you do not label the products that go into the European market, then our producers and our exporters will surely experience further problems on top of the problems that Brexit has delivered them.
That is work that DEFRA is going through at the moment.
Okay, so we can expect answers on that, can we?
Of course.
And some change in the progress of the bill, we'll start to see that labelling will be incorporated into the bill. Is that your opinion?
Well, it's entirely a matter for DEFRA, but they will do what's right for producers in the same way that I want whisky producers in Scotland to still be able to get their malting barley from their usual sources, or biscuit manufacturers, or any number of other people who are involved in the food and drink industry to still get their produce. This is very important we protect jobs.
Can I just say, obviously, as I say, the bill's progressing through the Parliament, and we'll be getting lots of evidence in the coming weeks on this, and there'll be much discussion, I'm sure. But I just taking this back to the constitutional issue, at the risk of upsetting colleagues, the Scottish Government was informed of the gene editing bill being introduced just the day beforehand, before it was introduced to this place. Surely that doesn't display a great deal of respect for the devolved government on this.
Well, as to whether that was ministerial or official, I don't. Could you answer the question? Was that at ministerial level or official level?
Ministerial level.
Right. So what normally happens is,
I understand it, because it was a letter, I think, that
so what
was
normally
given
happens when we're bringing new legislation forward, where if it sits in the devolved area, we engage very early because we know there'll be a legislative consent motion required, and engagement starts right at the beginning. If it is sitting as an England-only bill, then that changes the dynamic. But what happened, certainly with gene editing, the situation was that when it came to the Parliamentary Business Legislation Committee, which I sit on, which is a cabinet subcommittee, I was very keen that we offered it to, or that because it was devolved, they said, well, this is because these items about the planting the seed are devolved. I was very keen that the opportunity was made to Scottish farmers to have the same benefits as English farmers will have, and I said we need to engage with the Scottish Government on this, and that happened. Now, it will have happened at official level to begin with, to gauge the temperature, to explain the detail, to get the feedback, and then it will have gone to ministerial level. But as to the day before, it would have been a number of days before, and I can't give you the exact date, that George Eustace and I would have written to the Scottish Government asking them to engage in the bill.
Can I just... I've got the letter here, and the timeline's very clear from the relevant Scottish Government Minister, where she says she was expressed her disappointment with your invitation for Scotland to join the bill in the legislation coming the day before the bill was introduced in the UK Parliament. Despite repeated earlier requests from the Scottish Government and other devolved administrations, a draft of the bill was provided only on the afternoon before it was introduced.
Yes, well, there is plenty of time in front of us for the bill. The bill will develop. It will go through the bill committee. There is plenty of time. We will keep communicating with the Scottish Government. They have plenty of time to come on board, as all their stakeholders want them to.
Doesn't that indicate a lack of respect for the devolved government? This is a devolved area.
No.
This is a devolved area, and your government's own impact assessment makes it clear that it will have a significant impact on Scotland, despite it being English-only legislation.
As I say, it is an England-only bill. We would like the Scottish Government to come on board to make it a UK-wide bill. That's what we would like to achieve. But what we do with legislation is we speak at official level. We iron out the wrinkles. We work out whether or not there's an LCM required, or whether it's going to be England only, or etc., and then ministers get involved once that legwork has been done. That's perfectly normal. The ministers don't do the end negotiations, not the early negotiations.
Yeah, I would suggest the fact that the minister's written a letter to the Minister for Agriculture making.
Well, it's in response to the letter it's in a response to a letter we wrote. We wrote first.
I think it was more in a response to the fact that they weren't. It wasn't discussed before that legislation was introduced. But anyway, I do want to move on, if I may, Mr. Jack, and I wanted to ask just quickly. Can I ask Minister Stewart just about the city-region deals? Are these now being rolled up into the Shared Prosperity Fund? Because obviously they started in 2014. Long before the EU referendum and the need to replace European funding. They're no longer additional? Or?
No, the Shared Prosperity Fund and the city regional deals, although they all form part of the broader levelling up agenda, if you like, they're entirely separate funds. And the deals that have been struck on an individual basis, they are as they are.
I see. So they're not
Shared
being rolled up
Prosperity,
in
Levelling
terms
Up Fund, Community Ownership Fund, all these are in addition to.
They are in addition
to the city and regional growth deals.
Can I just ask how many, this might be for Mr. Rocky actually, how many civil servants from the Levelling Up Department are now based in Queen Elizabeth House?
Good afternoon. There are, in the Scotland-based area team in Department for Levelling Up, there is about 18 colleagues, of which they are, let me finish, they are based around Scotland, not all of them based in Queen Elizabeth House. But I would need to come back to you on the precise number.
That would be
but
really helpful, thank you.
Somewhere between 10 and 20.
Fine, good. And can you just explain how the awarding of Levelling Up funds, in particular, works between your two departments? I mean, how does it operate on a day-to-day basis? How do you work with each other? And who then has the job of the subsequent monitoring of those projects? I mean, Mr. Stewart, you seem to suggest that it wasn't about ticking boxes and who's responsible and that due diligence was being done, but I wasn't quite clear on where. So I'm just keen to see who's keeping track of those public funds and making sure that they are achieving the results that you want.
Well, just to be clear, when I said I don't have a spreadsheet of what I want spent, what I was meaning by that is I don't have a sort of predetermined judgment as to what money goes in regeneration projects and so on. Each project, of course, has to go through the proper evaluation and due diligence checks, which will happen with all sorts of people, depending on what it is, sometimes Scottish Government, if it's a city and regional growth deal. Ultimately, the Treasury will have to be satisfied of the case. So each deal is properly appraised before it is signed off.
Okay. And Mr. Rocky, just that working between the two departments?
Just to build on Minister Stewart, so bids from local authorities for Levelling Up Fund go to DLUC, where they are assessed across the United Kingdom, and there is a governance board that oversees the Levelling Up Fund that is ran by DLUC as the department responsible, which we at official level sit on and participate in. So we feed into the process, but DLUC are the responsible department. And in terms of obviously, ultimately, the permanent secretary for DLUC is the accounting officer for the fund, and therefore his officials will ensure value for money and monitoring the evaluation once the awards have been made.
Okay, so are you saying that the ultimate decision rests in London with civil servants down here, or, I mean, do you feel that there's enough understanding of the situation on the ground in Scotland? Do you feel that how do you... What can you tell me about that?
I think I'd say three things. DLUC deliberately set up a Scotland-based team that has colleagues based in the Highlands, based in the borders, and are from those areas in order to support local authorities with their bids and to support colleagues in London and elsewhere across the United Kingdom, because DLUC are not exclusively based in London. So we also, obviously, at Scotland office are half based in London, half based in Scotland, as you might expect, and so we obviously have a good local knowledge as well, and we feed into that process. And finally, I would say that I was speaking at Civil Service Live last week in Edinburgh, our annual civil service conference, and as you know, the Places for Growth agenda, there's a commitment to move 22,000 civil servants from London out to across the United Kingdom over the next by 2030. And so in Queen Elizabeth House in Edinburgh, we have somewhere between 15 and 20 departments already based with colleagues working together there in the UK government. So I think there is a recognition from the civil service to be less London-centric, and that work is, Queen Elizabeth House is a really good example of that.
No, I would find... Oh, sorry.
Can I just add to that? I think it's really important that we understand this. These aren't our projects. We haven't developed these. These have come from the local areas. So, for example, the redevelopment of Granton in your constituency, which was being funded, that came up through City of Edinburgh Council. And I met with them to discuss it, and when that bid went in, it went through all the appropriate appraisal checks. That's how it works. It's not our scheme. It comes from the ground up.
Of course, it bypasses the Scottish Government, who has worked very closely with the Edinburgh Council over many years in many areas. I did find that extraordinary, and as you know, I did
Are you
place
suggesting
that
we
on
don't
the record.
are you suggesting we don't fund?
I would suggest that you should be dealing with the Scottish Government as well. That's my position.
I think we should deal with the local authorities, and it's their schemes.
We took the decision right at the beginning to practice real devolution, and we're standing by it. So you want to suck it up and go with the programme, because there's so much can be achieved for your constituents.
Very ministerial.
Well, I know, but I'm just telling you, I mean, I actually met with the Granton Project people last week, and they've got a further bid they want to put, and they need the levelling up money, they need the MP support, and you are the MP, and I hope you'll get behind it.
I gave my support, absolutely. But what is real devolution? What's the Scottish Government then, the Scottish Parliament? Is that not real? Is that surreal devolution? What is it?
It's a centralising
real devolution.
central government.
What is a Scottish Government?
It's a central government. This is a central government.
Okay.
What we are about is empowering the local areas, not just at local authority level, but going down a level beyond that.
Bypassing the Scottish Government.
No,
anyway,
it's not. No, Deirdre, I've got to correct this. This is not about bypassing anyone. This is about empowering the local areas to identify the projects they want to see, which can often be complementary and unlock other investments, provided whether it's by this government, by the Scottish Government, by the private sector, by the university sector, and many others.
We're going to have to agree to disagree on that one, I think. Minister Stewart. Anyway, listen, I'm going to ask one last slightly cheeky question of the Secretary of State. It's based really, I noticed that the Trade Minister for the UK Government tweeted congratulations to all three in the territorial offices, saying that it was an important continuity after you all survived a reshuffle, a governmental reshuffle. I just wondered, is Scotland, in your opinion, a nation or a territory?
That's a ridiculous question. I mean, without a doubt, I'm a proud Scot. I back Scotland at every turn, both politically and sporting and anything, and economically, all my life. I built all my businesses. I built in Scotland, and we are a proud nation. But we are part of a United Kingdom.
You're a nation. That's very important. Thank you very much.
Has anyone ever said otherwise?
Well, why are they called the territorial officers? What is Scotland a territory of?
Well.
You're
getting hung up on terminology. We are one United Kingdom, but in the United Kingdom we have devolved administrations, and we have a nation in Scotland, a principality in Wales, and a province in Northern Ireland. That's just what the terminology is, whether you like it or not.
I see. So, therefore, England is a nation, you recognise that,
Yeah.
not a territory. So why call it a territorial office? There are many people who find that quite
If you come up with it, write to us with some suggestions of different names. I mean, really, do you know what?
People would have lots of suggestions.
It is the Scotland office. It is the Scotland office. It's very simple. It's not, it's binary. It's the Scotland office.
Okay.
That's who's here today. We're not calling ourselves the territorial office. Last time I looked.
Tell your colleagues, William.
People of Scotland should write to Alistair Jack, care of Dover House.
I only offered it to Deirdre, if you noticed.
Well, I shall ask all my friends in Scotland to give me their suggestions.
Let's call us the Scotland office, eh? Shouldn't confuse anyone, I hope.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, Secretary of State, Ministers and Mr Rocky. Could I just begin by picking up on a few points that have come up in the evidence session so far? And the Chair suggested that comments emanating from the Scotland Office about a potential inquiry into free ports was disrespectful. I have to say what I felt was disrespectful to this committee was the First Minister of Scotland taking more than half a year to respond to an invitation to appear before us, ignoring repeated requests from the clerks of this committee for a response and only ultimately refusing to appear after the personal intervention of the Chair. And I hope, maybe with the exception of the last question from the last questioner, that the First Minister might view this session and see that actually we are civil in our questions and we get good answers from our witnesses and may reconsider. And I think that would be very helpful to the work of this committee going forward. But I do think the point someone in the Scotland Office made about a potential inquiry into gene editing is an important one and a good one, given the range of discussion that we've already heard, and I'd like to continue that discussion. The Secretary of State will be, I'm sure, like me, an avid reader of the Scottish Farmer, and there's a very good article this week by Gordon Henderson in it about this issue, calling it a bit of a soap opera, given the dialogue between the two governments on this point. However, Secretary of State, you mentioned, I think, in response to Mr Lamont about the consultation which had been held by the UK government on this, and Mr Henderson writes in the Scottish Farmer that there has been a major public consultation on the issue of gene editing undertaken in England, and a full examination of the current restrictive regulations is currently underway across the EU. As far as I am aware, there is no formal consultation or dialogue on the issue currently underway in Scotland. And he concludes by saying, this effectively means that regardless of whether the Scottish Government sides with the UK Government or goes along with any changes to the EU rules, the only people to be denied any direct say over the future course of precision breeding technologies will be those aforementioned stakeholders in Scotland. Is that correct? And what's
Yes.
your response to that?
Yes, I mean, what you say is absolutely right. And actually, the Scotland Office has consulted, we have with the James Hutton Institute, the Roslin Institute, the Food and Drink, Scotland, the National Farmers Union of Scotland, etc., etc. So we have spoken to a number of stakeholder bodies. All of them have been supportive. Particularly farmers are very keen to have the opportunity to use this technology to their advantage, knowing that other farmers in other parts of the United Kingdom will be using it. And I mean, I can only put this down to political dogma. The Scottish Government want to follow their continuity bill and follow the EU on this, and the irony is that when the EU does change, the advantage will have been had in other parts of the United Kingdom by then. And the EU will change because they acknowledge that it's not genetic modification, it's gene editing, and there was a misjudgment by the ACJ some years ago. And so I would say it's political dogma that is getting in the way of this. And I would hope, and we keep the door open, as I keep saying, that the Scottish Government will come on side and give Scottish farmers the advantage that everyone else is going to have, and also give Scottish consumers the advantage of lower prices, which will inevitably will derive from this. So, as I say, it's disappointing. It is political dogma. There has been no consultation with the stakeholders. The National Farmers Union of Scotland want to engage with the Scottish Government, want the Scottish Government to come on side with this. Highland Show this week, we'll keep working on it. We're seeing the NFUS on Thursday and others. We'll keep working on it. We'd like to get them there. And as I say, our door will remain open.
And that's where I'd like to go to. Brian Henderson's article characterises this as a soap opera. Is there a way that this has a less predictable outcome of some soap operas, and we can find a way for the UK Government and Scottish Government to work together on this issue? Have you been encouraged in any way by the dialogue either your officials have had or at ministerial level?
Not so far, but that doesn't mean to say that we won't keep trying.
And before we move off this issue, you rightly mentioned the Highland Show. It's celebrating its 200th year this year from Thursday to Sunday after a very difficult 2-year absence. I'm sure as Secretary of State and the entire Scotland Office would wish the organisers and everyone attending a very successful Highland Show at Ingleston this week.
Absolutely, and let's hope for good weather.
Here, here. The other issue that you've mentioned that I don't think has come up under questioning so far is free ports, and it has been extremely positive today to hear of the 5 bids that have now been received in the process which will now be undertaken. I think you said in your opening remarks that when you visited Teesside it felt like that area had stolen a march on us because of the delays. Can you expand that perhaps, and also respond to a point the First Minister made in the Scottish Parliament earlier this month on the 9th of June when one of my colleagues, Liam Kerr MSP, asked about the process to get to the stage where the two governments could agree to free ports. The First Minister said, had we gone with the UK government timescale on the issue, we would have had significantly less money to invest in green ports in Scotland. Is that correct? Would there have been significantly less money to invest had we gone with the original timescale of the UK government, which, as you've said, we are seeing other areas of the United Kingdom progressing well? No.
To answer that first point, I mean, the initial offer was that so if you take the demography of this, demographically, the Treasury were giving, with all the tax breaks the Treasury fund, we're giving one green free port, if you like, the name we ended up with, to Scotland, and the Scotland office argued that geographically it should be 2. Now, what the Treasury said was that we will give we'll give the tax benefits of the Scotland. So for the Scottish second one, the Scottish government pays the capital. Now the capital's up to 25 million. I was dealing at the time with Minister McKee. He was resistant to that, but we were keen to do 2. So we argued strongly. The Scotland office argued strongly that we should do 2 fully funded for Scotland, and that's where we ended up. We still had a long way to go to persuade the Scottish government to come on board. They were very hostile towards the idea at the beginning. They wanted to come up with this model of green ports, which was not competitive. It had much higher wage costs and other things built in. And actually, the English model, as Teesside will tell you, Ben Houch will tell you, is very green anyway. There's no difference now between the costs of labour or the net zero agenda for free ports across the United Kingdom. But I was very keen that the Scottish ones were not in any way put at a disadvantage, and that was part of my negotiations. The Green coalition partners were opposed to them. I think they still remain opposed to them as a concept. But in fact, I think there was an article in a newspaper in Press and Journal this week I saw from a Green MSP still opposed to them, calling them tax evading models and all this sort of nonsense. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that we got there, and the credit for meeting us halfway across the bridge actually goes to Kate Forbes. She stepped up to the plate and said, you know what, this is a good offer from the UK government. This is good for the economy. And we were able to eventually to get a deal. Now, to answer your question, that had taken rather a long time, and as a result, others in England, particularly Teesside, have stolen a march on Scotland, and there's inward investment. There's only so much inward investment available. I'm disappointed about that. But we've got to the place today where there are 5 bids, and I'll tell you who they're from. They're from Orkney, Aberdeen and Peterhead, Firth of Forth, Inverness and Cromarty, and Clyde. And 2 of those will be successful. I can't comment any further at this stage, but the decision will now be taken by a minister from the Scotland office, a minister from the Department for Levelling Up, a minister from the Treasury, and a minister from the Scottish Government. And we will sit down and work together and look at what we believe to be the 2 best bids, and they will be fully funded, £25 million, up to £25 million each by the Treasury. And I hope that we can get them motoring by the end of this year.
Yeah, and another point you mentioned earlier, when I think in response to the Chair speaking about the constitutional issue, stated that Nicola Sturgeon and her government relies heavily on the Greens, and they have 2 ministers within the government. They are part of the Scottish Government, and you're right, one of the MSPs for the northeast of Scotland, one of the areas that could potentially benefit significantly from this, said that the free ports were a tax-dodging scheme and ridiculed the fact that the project could create up to 30,000 jobs. Now, coming into this meeting, I thought that was pretty awful. I was more surprised to hear Deirdre Brock acknowledging from a sedentary position that she seemed to agree with that, and that's something we can maybe raise at a later point. But are you worried that Green and SNP members actually think that these are tax-dodging schemes and they would put at jeopardy the opportunity to create tens of thousands of jobs in the 2 ports across Scotland?
We had a letter to that effect during the negotiation process from Ivan McKee, and we dismissed it and moved our negotiations towards Kate Forbes, where we met with considerably more warmth, if you like, and we were able to conclude matters. So does it surprise me that's their position? No. Does it matter? Not really, because the Cabinet, the Finance CabSec is on board, and we will deliver these free ports. 2 governments working together, I'm absolutely sure we'll deliver these free ports, and they will bring the high skill, high wage jobs that we want them to bring.
And finally, on this point, there are 5 bidders for 2 successful ports. What could happen with the other 3? What opportunities may there be for the 3 that will miss out on this occasion?
Okay, so that is, funny enough, Lawrence and I were discussing that only last week. That is at the forefront of our mind, but I'm not going to be drawn on it because we're at the beginning of the process, and you'll understand if I don't want to either show any inclination towards any of the bids or even discuss if there are any runners-up prizes. I think this is not the time.
Well, given you don't refuse to come before us, maybe we can ask it at your next appearance
yes.
in front of this committee. Could I finally ask, it's slightly to go back to gene editing, but to speak about the cost of living crisis, because I think something that we've not touched on so far today is the global cost of living crisis, and people are clearly worried about fuel costs, heating costs, etc. But I have a big concern that actually the cost of food is something that is going to become more and more apparent and more difficult for people. And throughout your answer so far, Secretary of State, you on gene editing, you have been speaking about this is a process that we've been through for a very long time. What opportunities could we be closing the door to in Scotland if we didn't support these moves in terms of helping to secure a supply of food? And in terms of the history of this, those avid West Wing watchers will remember a fictional president speaking about a very real person, Norman Borlaug. But in the 1970s, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for saving more than 1 billion people from starvation because of the technologies he used to make the shafts of wheat stronger.
Yes.
Surely, given that this has been around now for well over 50 years,
yes,
this is something we should be embracing. And to go back to Minister Offord's point, it could actually help us with the critical phase that we are now going towards in Scotland, across the UK and many parts of the world, in terms of ensuring there is enough food to feed the world.
Well, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, you and I both have a farming background, and we know the challenges that the weather brings, particularly in Scotland. Extreme, it can be, crops can be flattened by heavy rain, it can be flattened by wind, they can, if there are many different outcomes. I mean, I've seen sleet in June. Crops can be damaged in so many ways, and the more resistant they are to extreme weather, and we're seeing more extreme weather patterns coming, the better. So that's one thing, but also we can reduce the applications of pesticides. So if you look at the agenda that on the environment, there is an evidence that you can reduce the reliance on pesticides. You can make the crops more nutritious. You can combat diseases, other diseases, so that aren't necessarily pesticide borne. You can obviously meet the challenges of the climate emergency, as I've said, but you can also increase yields, which is a great advantage because that will bring the cost of food down. Increasing yield and reducing the cost of fertiliser, which is incredibly expensive. I mean, it's tripled plus in the last year as a cost base for farmers. That is a fantastic thing if we can achieve it. And so I would like Scottish farmers to have the benefits of that, as indeed English farmers will. And I'd like Scottish consumers to have the benefit of less expensive food on the shelves.
Thank you, Secretary. Chair.
Yes, of course.
I just wanted to quickly point out, Mr. Ross doesn't seem to be aware of it, but Brussels actually clamped down on 82 free ports or free zones after it conducted a review because they claimed and I'm quoting from The Guardian here, the special tariff and duty status of those has aided the financing of terrorism, money laundering and organised crime. Obviously, we don't want to see that happen in free ports in the UK. So can you perhaps reassure us that there is how that will be monitored continuously as these free ports develop? Because
absolutely,
clearly we don't want to see any of that.
You are a little bit fixated with the EU, but I understand that. But let me explain. With free ports in the UK, the Treasury will offer the customs benefits and the VAT benefits, and then there's the local business rates relief for a period, and there's some help with new jobs on national insurance contributions. Those are the things. All of those things are monitored through the Treasury, and there will be proper controls put in place. So I have no concern that the accusations that came forward about there being, tax evasion, drug smuggling, etc., etc. I think Ivan Key wrote his letter reminiscent of 18th century, and then he listed off all these different things. None of that is what our free ports are about. Our free ports are about job and wealth creation, and as far as I would be very confident the Treasury will not stand idly by and allow any malpractices. I'd be very confident of that.
Just to be clear, good. No, I'm very pleased to hear that. Just to be clear, it's not 18th century. What did you say?
Well, that's what he said. That's what the letter said that came to me.
So,
from the Scottish Government. They're reminiscent of the 18th century practices, and then there was a list of them. I'm not going to bore you with the detail. The letter was public at the time.
No, but that review from the EU was just done in 2020, I think, or perhaps 2019. So
well,
it's quite recent.
Well, the United Kingdom government has the ability to structure the free ports in a way, and I would implore you to go to Teesside and meet Ben Houchen and talk to him about the structure that he has to put in place, the reporting he has to do, and also the advantages. This committee could do worse than take a day, train to Northallerton, change to Middlesbrough, whatever. Go there, go to it, visit it for the day. I was there a week past Thursday, and it was fantastic to see what's going on, and you will get a much better understanding of free ports and the advantages rather than this rather antediluvian view that some people are taking.
Okay, thanks very much.
I think we're all very grateful to your ministerial suggestions about what the time of it should be utilised.
Let's keep you busy, Chairman.
Can I just finish this with the cost of living crisis and some of the issues around this? And I'm just wondering if you, Secretary of State, could tell us that, given the particular challenges that Scotland have, our distinct issues around rurality, demography and climate, Scotland may be entitled and maybe deserves a little bit extra support given the difficulties that we're facing?
Well, we've tackled this on a UK-wide basis, the support for households, less well-off households, the support on coming in October for their energy bills, and then there's also the household support fund scheme, and that absolutely has a devolved element to it. So there is money going directly to the Scottish Government for them to be able to then use that to help for people in Scotland. And I understand you're going to say, well, the weather, it's a bit colder up there and all the other things, and I do completely understand that argument. But the way things are structured at the moment, there is a record settlement to the Scottish Government this year of 41.6 billion, plus there's the Barnett consequential money, the extra funding that's come from these announcements. And so the Scottish Government have that money to be able to give to the people who need it to help them.
I get all that, and I know the Scottish Government are doing what they can with the resources and facilities available to them, but I'm just wondering, when you're at the Cabinet table and you're having all these in-depth conversations about cost of living crisis and how you help the whole United Kingdom, do you ever make the point about Scotland's particular requirements, about our rurality, for example?
I do.
I know you dismissed the climate there, but surely we're the coldest part of the UK by quite a distance.
So I make it on. I absolutely make it on this point. I also make it on things like transmission charges and the other issues, and we're engaging with Ofgem on that, but we also engage with BEIS on it, and on other things I engage with the Treasury. But I can assure you, whether it was making sure the furlough scheme worked for the whole of the United Kingdom or any other manner of things, whenever these issues come up, I look at it straight through the lens of someone who is Scottish born and bred, and I think, what do we need, etc., etc. Yeah. I look at it straight through that lens, and I go,
And just last...
That's the argument I need to make, because that's what I'm here to do.
Can I just add
quickly,
one
we've got not much time.
very specific example? When we were looking at the distribution formula for the Shared Prosperity Fund, we didn't just use the English one. We worked with COSLA to design a formula that did respect the word that I can rarely say, rurality. I've got it this time.
Lastly, and it's a simple question you get from your constituents, and sometimes the simplest questions are the hardest to answer. And the one I get regular just now, and maybe you could answer this for me, is like, Scotland's one of the most energy-rich nations, and not just in Europe, but the whole of the world. How, therefore, do we have about the highest energy bills in the world?
So our energy bills are, I mean, Lord Offord is an expert in this area, but our energy bills are, as you know, set as a global rate, and that's one of the problems we have. And electricity is linked to gas, and the gas price is a global price, the oil price is a global price. And I ask the same question myself, Mr. Chairman. You know, but we have a long-term strategy to bring it down. We've gone for the offshore wind option, but the wind doesn't always blow. We are looking at mini nuclear reactors. We're looking at fusion. These are the things we would like to do that can be more cleaner energies. Fusion is a much cleaner energy to help. And again, we are engaging with the Scottish Government. Minister Hands has been doing that to ask them to come on board with some of those options that give long-term energy security and bring costs down and make us less reliant on global prices.
So, when I answer this constituents, given that we're also sustaining support in a number of the initiatives of the UK government through taxation from Scottish oilfields, that it's a global thing.
Well, it is a global thing. I mean, the taxation is the levy that has been brought in is to help with the cost for the Chancellor to give more money to the less well-off households. I mean, that's, you know, that package is £37 billion.
Well, thank you ever so much for today. As always, Secretary of State, it's a pleasure to have you at the committee and all your colleagues. And please, in the future, bring all your colleagues along again. I think it's a much more convivial, enjoyable session. But thanks for your time again today, as always, Secretary of State. And for this afternoon, order. Thank you.